Hey guys, my name is Scott Bennion. I'm just here kicking off the etiology portion of Hansen's disease or leprosy. Just to start off, something interesting that I found while I was going through studying the actual disease is that leprosy or Hansen's disease, what we know as leprosy today, is actually different from the leprosy that's mentioned in the Old Testament and the New Testament in the Bible. Specifically, though, the Old Testament. The word leprosy, as we read it in the Bible, is somewhat incorrectly translated from the word seraot. I hope I'm saying that right. I'm not sure I am. I'm no Hebrew expert. But that word, technically, if you were to directly translate it, means something more along the lines of defiled or unclean. And it was used to describe more than one different ailment. It wasn't actually one specific disease or something in the Bible. As it goes through and describes symptoms, and there's actually more than one different ailment. Some of them being eczema or ulcers. At least it's what it sounds like when you read these descriptions. And some of them are even just like guys that were super dirty. Wasn't necessarily Hansen's disease. Actually, something interesting is that Hansen's disease, that we know today, didn't, or at least it wasn't observed and recorded in the Middle East or Israel or any of these areas until about 300 years BC. The Old Testament ends about 400 or 500 BC, so it's a whole 100 to 200 years before leprosy, Hansen's disease, was actually recorded as being something present in that area. And it's thought that it was brought in by armies of Alexander the Great after coming through China, or maybe even trade routes from China. There's a few different speculations, but that's the general idea. So, moving on. The bacteria that causes leprosy, or that is leprosy, Mycobacterium leprae, was discovered in 1873 by a guy named Hansen. That's why we call it Hansen's disease. It's a slow-growing bacteria. It's gram-positive, rod-shaped bacillus. It's acid-fast. We have a picture of it under a microscope right here in the PowerPoint. Hope you guys can see that. Something interesting about it is that it cannot, or at least it hasn't been cultivated artificially, meaning it has to be in some kind of a living host body. It hasn't been developed, cultivated outside of a host body. Places that it's been cultivated, obviously it's been observed in humans, but in a lab they have found that armadillos are ready to hold the bacteria, and they're usually the most common test subject. It's also been found that they can take nasal drippings from patients or skin samples and inject them into foot pads of mice, and they can also hold that bacteria. But it's actually very rare and very hard to observe just because it is such a hard thing to cultivate. And that's about it for the etiology. And I'm going to turn the time over to my teammates to continue with all the other portions. Thank you.
Leprosy is mainly transmitted by nasal secretions and droplets. So someone that is infected, they carry the bacteria in like mucus or like in their mouths and saliva. So if someone sneezes, that is a way for it to be transmitted. And it really, if it gets on someone's hands and then they get it into their mouths, and if it gets into their body, it can cause the disease, but like normal touching and hugging and spending time with someone that is infected with the disease, there really isn't a chance of getting it. And it also takes like a long time exposure to someone that is infected and like within close proximity to be able to get the disease. Also, in armadillos, they naturally carry the bacteria that causes leprosy, but it's kind of a very low risk. I mean, it could possibly spread it to humans. People aren't quite sure, but it is kind of very low risk. I mean, it's still a good idea to avoid armadillos, but there is a slight chance that the bacteria on the armadillos can spread to humans and cause leprosy to occur. But it is very unlikely. It is also said that 95% of people that already have an immunity to the disease, so the transmission of it is very unlikely, and the chance of it actually causing leprosy is not that high. And then the signs and symptoms, there's kind of a wide variety, but these are just some of the main symptoms and signs that you can get when you are infected with leprosy. So the first one is just like discolored patches of skin. So they'll normally be a different color than your normal skin. So normally like a lighter shade. There can be growths on the skin that can appear all over your body. There's thick, stiff, or dry skin, and you can get some painless ulcers on the soles of your feet. There can be lumps on your face and earlobe, so just like lumps that you can get over your body. And you can lose your eyebrows and eyelashes. It can also cause some muscle weakness. And so it also affects your nerves, so it can cause your nerves to enlarge. And there can also be numbness of the skin where the skin has been affected. There can be numbness there. And so there are some of the signs and symptoms of just like what you can do when you have leprosy, to expect when you have leprosy. And yeah.
As was mentioned by both Christy and Scott, the only host organisms we currently know of for the bacterium are human beings and armadillos. Even then, armadillos were only recently confirmed to be a carrier. They weren't really sure about that for a long while. There is currently some research being done on whether leprosy can survive in just soil or not. But as Scott mentioned, it's very difficult to grow Mycobacterium leprae in a lab. So it may take a while to get results on that. They've been working on it for a little bit. It's just leprosy is rare. It's hard to grow in a lab. It's kind of difficult to study because of that. With that being said, leprosy is far more common in tropical environments, or like hot and humid places. In the United States, for example, the South and California are much more likely to have a case of leprosy than any other region. But keep in mind that chance is still absolutely minuscule. Very few people will actually catch leprosy in the United States. Most cases of leprosy in the United States, actually the person got leprosy in a different country before coming in. So there you go. Brazil and a small number of Asian countries, including India, reported over 1,000 cases of leprosy last year. But in the United States, over the last several decades, the average number of leprosy cases has been 150. And again, most of those cases of leprosy, it's been someone's gone to another country, caught leprosy there and came back. I think it was also Scott who mentioned that most people have a natural immunity to the disease. And that natural immunity is mostly because of a series of genes that code for our immune systems. When a person is naturally immune to Mycobacterium leprae, their immune system in most cases kill the bacterium with non-specific immunity, and in less frequent cases, then the leprosy will be killed by the specific immunity. And people who are still susceptible to leprosy, right, who don't have that natural immunity, they just have an insane amount of genetic bad luck to be able to catch leprosy. I looked this up because genetics interest me, and according to the U.S. Bureau of Medicine, there are 6 different genes that would be mutated in order for a person's immune system to not detect Mycobacterium leprae. So even though humans are technically part of the bacterium's reservoir, you're still not very likely to catch leprosy just because there's not many cases in the U.S. The only places we know of it being are in humans and armadillos, and in like wet, humid, kind of tropically type places, or hot places. So I mean, even if you come across like a savage leprous armadillo in Florida, you're still probably not going to catch it. So there's not too much to be worried about. Unless you have leprosy, then be worried about leprosy, but otherwise, don't worry about it. All right, I'm going to hand this over to Ellie to finish this off.
Treatment for leprosy. Leprosy is completely curable with multi-drug therapy. This is typically a combination of 2 to 3 drugs, depending on the case, and they treat the disease this way so that the body cannot develop a resistance to one specific medication, because treatment is over a long period of time. In 2018, there were over 200,000 cases of leprosy, which is kind of surprising because we usually think of leprosy as like a biblical disease. But it might be because only 100 of those were from the U.S., and a majority of those cases were from India. The treatment for leprosy is completely free, but it can take a long period of time, hence the use of multi-drug therapy. Depending on the case, it can take anywhere from 6 months to 2 years to be completely treated. And they also typically will have patients do follow-up appointments every few months for 5 years or so once they've been cured of leprosy. And although leprosy is completely curable, the damage that is caused before treatment is irreversible. So blindness or loss of fingers or things like that can't be reversed once it's been treated. Prevention of leprosy. The best form of prevention is early diagnosis and immediate treatment in the infected patient. If someone is untreated for leprosy, you want to avoid coming in contact with them until they do receive treatment. And currently there is no vaccine available specifically made to prevent leprosy. But there is the vaccine for tuberculosis that some studies say might provide protection against leprosy. This is because the organism that causes leprosy is closely related to the organism that caused tuberculosis. So there are still studies going to see if the tuberculosis vaccine is actually effective in preventing leprosy. And an infected person is typically no longer contagious after 24 hours of multi-drug therapy. So even though they do have to do treatment for up to 2 years, they're typically no longer contagious after 1 day. So you don't have to be afraid of coming in contact with them after 24 hours. So that is our presentation on leprosy.